Hello and welcome, history fans, to History Play-by-Play. Today, the impeachment of Andrew Johnson.
In all alone. Dangle, shot. He scores!
So to talk about the impeachment of Andrew Johnson, we probably should talk a little about who is Andrew Johnson. And we'll start the story April 14th, 1865, when Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. At that point, with the president assassinated, the vice president is now the president, and that vice president was Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat and Lincoln a Republican. It's hard to even imagine such a situation now, but Lincoln was all about trying to unite the country, and he felt by bringing in Democrats as well, he could do that even better. So Johnson was a rare breed. He was an anti-secession Democrat from Tennessee, a Southern boy, and one who grew up poor in the South and definitely did not have any love for the slaveholding plantation owners, though there's questions of was he just bitter and wanted to become one himself. But the point is that he was brought in to balance the ticket, and now with the assassin's bullet from John Wilkes Booth, we go from a Republican to a Democrat in the highest office in the land. Following the Civil War, which, is wrapping up at that point, Reconstruction goes through a few different phases. And under presidential Reconstruction, which is pushed by Andrew Johnson, really the first real Lincoln had his Reconstruction plan, but obviously he didn't get to implement it. So presidential Reconstruction, as it's usually called, under Andrew Johnson, involves Southerners swearing a oath of loyalty to the United States, a general amnesty to everyone who fought for the South who gives that oath, and a restoration of property excluding slaves, obviously. Now, here's where the thing of Johnson's background perhaps playing a role. Large landowners and Confederate leaders must petition Johnson specifically, individually, for a pardon. They had to ask him for forgiveness, to grovel at his feet, so to speak. And was this Johnson simply trying to get back at all those wealthy plantation owners that he never got to be part of whenever he was younger? I'm sure he definitely enjoyed that piece of it. And states must ratify the 13th Amendment outlawing slavery for readmittance. That's going to be seen in all phases of Reconstruction. A lot of quick shifts are happening, but at the same time, Reconstruction as a whole is going very slowly. The idea of 40 acres and a mule was going to be doled out largely from the land that William Tecumseh Sherman had conquered on his march to the sea. But that was all taken away, including a lot of land that had already been given out to a number of freedmen, of former slaves, who were now starting to work that land. They figured that was now theirs. That's obviously going to cause some problems. Andrew Johnson says that white men alone must manage the South. Johnson was a pretty big racist, whereas, you can question Lincoln and say that maybe he didn't believe in full equality or that the races themselves are equal. Johnson has no such benefit of the doubt to even question that. And so it's in this time, Southern states begin electing former Confederates to public offices, black codes are enacted. That's a whole separate video. Things were very, very bad for the former slaves in the South. In December of 1865, Johnson declares Reconstruction complete, with Congress not in session. And everyone's just kind of like, but what? It was way too quick. Nothing was done. And so the radical Republicans, the Republicans who were pushing for full emancipation and now full equality, just don't recognize these governments, saying, no, this is not how this works. There are more than 60 Confederates looking to take their seats in Congress, 4 Confederate generals, and 6 Confederate cabinet members trying to take their seats in the Senate. And so there's a whole big mess going on in Congress we are not going to hold Congress with them. They just fought against us. This also is the same time you start to get the Great Migration of African Americans moving north. This would be one of a couple, depending on how you cut up those waves. But a significant move, going from 90% of African Americans in this country living in the southern states to 50-50 by the 1970s. It's pretty intense. In 1866, Congress is getting very tired of Andrew Johnson. There are multiple opportunities trying to put civil rights bills of sorts. There's a lot of things that Johnson vetoes, and the Congress actually gets together to override the vetoes, which is very difficult to do. He gives what's called the swing around the circle speeches. Johnson is just considered an utter buffoon throughout and loses just about everyone who had supported him up to this point. There's violence with riots and massacres in Memphis and New Orleans. And you start to see the opposite of the radical Republicans who call themselves the Redeemers rising in Congress. We're kind of getting to a fever pitch of everything's about to fall apart. And so we get an answer that we had not gotten up to this point in history: impeachment. To be clear, and I'm not going to take long on this, impeachment is not removing the president. It is simply bringing charges. It is saying, the president, you have messed up. You have committed these crimes. We are formally accusing you of that. The House votes on whether or not those crimes are real crimes, and once the House does that, a president is impeached. And then it goes to the Senate to act as the trial. So we have had 3 presidents impeached in our history. We have had none removed. Spoiler. That's simply how it goes. The House decides on whether impeachment happens. The Senate decides whether or not the impeachment becomes removal. Andrew Johnson has been upsetting people. He is looking to fire the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, pictured there. Stanton opposes the president on most things, a Lincoln loyalist, and he refuses to accept that he's going to be fired. He's not going to resign. So Congress basically lays a trap called the Tenure of Office Act. The president must get consent from the Congress in order to fire anyone in the cabinet. Johnson believes this is unconstitutional and therefore unenforceable, so he's going to be able to do it. And he actually plays his cards pretty well. He will fire Stanton, but he hires Ulysses S. Grant, who is someone who is universally beloved. He figures, look, I might have gotten rid of this guy, but I've replaced him with someone you all should love more. It doesn't work out that way. Within 3 days, there are 11 charges brought to a vote for violating the Tenure of Office Act on grounds of impeachment. And the radical Republicans saw this as their big chance to make this happen. Thaddeus Stevens says this isn't any temporary triumph. It's whether or not that we are going to simply listen to the president or do what we feel is right. Obviously, he was much more eloquent than me. The full 11 orders are there. They all basically boil down to 3 basic ideas, and those are the 3 ideas that are voted upon. And why they're not in numerical order. So Article 11 is the first one voted on. It's that Johnson illegally violated the Tenure of Office Act by removing Secretary of War Edwin Stanton and failed to follow all the laws along with that, with notifying the Senate and going through proper channels. He then appointed a new Secretary of War when the last Secretary of War was not gone, and Congress is basically saying, you can't have 2, that's also illegal. And so by appointing someone else in that place as acting Secretary of War, one would assume until Grant steps in, is also illegal. Again, you can't have 2. Why they didn't vote on all 11? I don't know. But essentially they grouped them and went with that. There are 27 states voting in the Senate, 54 members. There are 10 states from the Confederacy that are not yet readmitted to the Union, and so we have a partial count, essentially. 3 of these articles are voted upon, and in each of the 3, the vote is 35-19. You need 2/3 majority in order to get approval on any one of those articles of impeachment. If you get 36 votes, the president is removed. That's 36 on any one. And apparently, the 19 not guilties were the 10 Republicans who voted not guilty never held office again, and many of them were attempted to be bribed, they were threatened. There's apparently a lot of sordid things going on in this. But in the end, he is 1 vote shy of being removed. Later on, there would be investigations into improper tampering of evidence. I can't believe, history repeats itself, but it doesn't come to anything. There were investigations into the investigation. And so Johnson will remain as president, even though he is impeached. He is not removed, and essentially is a lame duck for the rest of his presidency, though he does get Alaska. The aftermath, the impact, is that the presidency is severely weakened by this act of Congress, though unofficially Congress will be in charge for the next 30, 40 years. This is the era where we get Benjamin Harrison and Chester Arthur and Grover Cleveland and presidents who most high schoolers are quick to forget if they remember them at all. So Congress will be in charge for the next few decades. The Tenure of Office Act itself would be repealed in 1887, and a similar bit of legislation was introduced in the 1920s, and that would also be found unconstitutional. So in the end, Johnson was right, but he's still our first president to be impeached. And that is all I got for you. That's the end of the episode. What you just saw is this teacher's interpretation of events. If you use this for a class, let me know how that went in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you can figure out how today's jersey matches the content, let me know in the comments. That's extra credit. I'm John Baranowski, and thanks for watching.